they've asked me to speak today, and as Art was saying, Representative Handy was saying, I'm an attorney with Conservation Law Foundation, and they've asked me to do a presentation on the effects and impacts of climate change. And you might be wondering to yourself why you would want a former prosecutor and environmental lawyer talking to you about the effects of climate change, and I'm going to explain that to you in a second. But you know, as a lawyer, and you can do the first slide, we like facts, and we like science, and we like to use facts and science to shape the arguments to influence decision makers, whether they be judges or policymakers or legislators. That's you know, where it all is for us. And so we'll start this off with facts. These are some of the facts that I like. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was established in 1988. There are thousands of scientists that participate in the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was established by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations. Its fifth assessment, which just came out in September, is authored by 259 authors. There are 39 participating countries. They received over 55,000 comments from the public and the scientific community. And their findings on their fifth assessment are that warming in the climate system is unequivocal. And since 1950, many changes have been observed throughout the climate system that are unprecedented over decades to millennia. And then they go on to say that we understand that this is caused by human activity, because the solution is limiting climate change will require substantial and sustained reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. Because my presentation today, this is an enormous report. My computer and technology at a nonprofit won't download the chapters because they're that long. It's peer-reviewed by thousands of scientists. There is no question that there is more factual understanding about the link between human activity and climate change than there is about smoking and lung cancer. So it is unequivocal. I'm not here to have this conversation and this debate and argument about whether climate change is real and what the consequences of it are. One of the findings is about this phenomenon, the wet get wetter and the dry get drier. And in March of 2010, Rhode Island experienced unprecedented flooding in the state. And for most of the people in this room that don't hail from West Warwick, as I do, it is fast and easily forgotten. So I'm going to take you on a little journey back to March 2010, and this is my journey home from the State House, where I was having a meeting with Representative Handy about climate change, at which someone told me that they were closing 95 South. If you can just go back. This is my exit, Route 37 West, and this is the Patuxent River. When I got to Route 37 West, having left the meeting with Art Handy, the Patuxent River was already coming over Route 95. Next slide. This is the car I was behind on Providence Street, where I was, you can see the yellow church, that is where my children's school is. And I was going to pick them up on my way home, and I was met with a police blockade, and had to think about how I was going to get around the police blockade to get my children out of the school. If you take a look at this slide, which again is another aerial, let's see here. This is the Warwick Mall. You can see the Patuxent River wraps around all of this infrastructure, all of this pavement. You just watch the Patuxent River as it winds. This is the West Warwick Sewer Treatment Facility. This is my children's school and where I was in the blockade. So now I have to think to myself, once I pick them up, the Patuxent River winds through West Warwick. So if it's already coming over 95 and it's already flooded this intersection, this is what I could not see from my car. This was the intersection that the police were preventing me from reaching, and this was before the river had crested at 20.9 feet, which is, approximately 12 feet above flood stage. It had not yet crested. It would crest the following day. This is the West Warwick Sewer Treatment Plant, which I snapped a shot at before I figured out which road I had to diverge on. It is completely underwater, and the following day we would be told that we were not allowed to flush our toilets, and that we would be basically directly flushing into Narragansett Bay and the Patuxent River over the course of the next week or two until the sewer treatment plant came back online. This is my route home over Wakefield Street, and you can see that I am basically coming down over the street into this village, and I'll show you what the village looks like next on my way home, having to cross at this point to get to my street, which is over here. And I'm not sure whether I'm going to be able to make it or not, but I get to the bottom. This is Lippett Mill. This is the oldest historic mill in West Warwick. It was once the lace and linen manufacturing capital of the world, erected in 1809, and the river is no longer contained within the banks of the Patuxent River. Next. This is the side street, not an option for me because the river is now flowing down the side street, and I have to basically go back where I came from. This is where I crossed at the bridge. The river had not yet come over the bridge, but again, not quite crested and clearly raging. You can see these trees along the side, and you'll have a better shot of this at the next picture, are actually the river bank. That is the river bank on the Patuxent River. It's completely underwater. This is the location where my car, the day before I was meeting with Representative Handy, I was in a car accident, and my car was towed to Reliable Collision in West Warwick. This area, which you will see in the next slides, was completely inundated with water, 12 to 15 feet of water. There are basically car repair shops in here that had to jack up the cars and all of their equipment as high as they would go and abandon their businesses. And I came down the following day with my family to see if I could see if my car was underwater or if it was remarkably spared. You can see the fence. This is, a 10-foot tall chain link fence. The plaza is completely underwater. Remarkably, my car, I don't know how, but was on like the one dry spot in this plaza. But you can see that the river from these slides is no longer contained by the banks. It's doing what it wants. If you can just go back to that slide. What I will tell you is that my initial reaction was relief that my car was safe. My next reaction was to break down and cry, because I was actually completely, having lived 41 years in West Warwick, I was completely overwhelmed by what I was seeing. And the fact that I had spent basically a career looking at facts and making arguments, and that there were no arguments that could be made. There was no law, there was no policy that could be changed that was going to change the impact for these businesses and these homes in this moment. There was nothing we could do about it. The water had come and we had to deal with it, and hopefully we would be making some smart decisions in the aftermath. That did not happen, and that's where kind of all of that emotion from that event turned into anger and questioning. You saw the slide with the Warwick Mall. Why on God's good earth, after the water had pushed the parking lot up, were we repaving it? Why weren't we putting a parking garage in and giving the watershed a chance to become more resilient, to adapt to these types of events. Why were we putting the bridges back where they had been wiped out? Why was I still now, 4 years later this March, why am I driving over bridges that have not been repaired, by homes that were condemned and are still not housed, by businesses with for lease signs and for sale signs that will never be replaced? So we can go to, South County, and we can look at these coastal issues in this coastal context and listen to people talk about rebuilding their homes or putting their businesses back up. But I will tell you, and I have Providence Journal news articles to represent this, that in West Warwick, those choices were not available to people. Their homes were condemned, and they were told to leave. And that is their reality. Just a couple of points about the rain in this setting, which I've already gone over. Basically, the grand total here was 8.8 inches of rain. And it was at this point in my life that I started listening to news reports about rain, not in terms of whether it would be a sunny day or a cloudy day, but in terms of how many inches of rain we expected to fall in how many hours. Because that's going to tell me whether I need to get into my car and go get my kids from my school, because all the same places that flooded in March 2010 are going to flood again. And they have continued to flood in those areas. I don't know if I have... So I wanted to put this up here because for those of you who don't think that dealing with climate change or don't understand the relationship between the environment and the natural world and the economy, or for those arguments that we all who are believers go up against every day about how dealing with climate change and responding to carbon dioxide emissions will cost us more because we're putting out natural gas and coal and oil businesses that are cheaper. Keep these figures in mind. $36 million for individuals and households, $16 million in public assistance, $45 million in small business assistance loans, $14 million in DOT contracts to respond to the West Warwick floods. That doesn't include that we had to open up 500 new emergency shelters, that our 911 system essentially collapsed in response to the calls of people saying the river is coming through my home. The evacuation orders, the National Guard. These are real costs. These are not fabricated. This isn't made up. These are real costs. And for a lot of these people, like this article about a family whose children went to the same school that my children went to, who talk about the other types of costs, the costs that don't show up on the budget sheets, like the fact that her 10-year-old is terrified of the river and afraid of drowning. Her younger son screamed in his sleep in the hotel room where they left and spent 3 months. They don't tell you that the father took out a $10,000 loan so that his family wouldn't have to go to a shelter, and then was told by emergency management that because he took out a $10,000 loan, he wasn't entitled to any recovery money, because that meant that he could basically handle things on his own. This is just one story. There are thousands of those stories of the businesses that never reopened and what that means for those families. This article, which was written about 9 months after the West Warwick floods, Rhode Islanders still struggle with devastation left by the floods, December 29, 2010, talks about one recent caller whose house was condemned who flew off the deep end. She's just very emotionally drained. She's insisting she wants to go back even though the house is condemned, and the city told her she couldn't live there anymore. The river literally went through her home. The woman was referred to counseling. That's it. We don't know what happened to the woman, but her home's gone. So one of the things that I think, I don't know if I have another slide, but one of the things that I think is so important about this particular legislation that Rep. Handy and Ken Payne and Meg and Timmons are working on is that it helps us start to frame this conversation as a state. And if you knew, if you could say to yourself, if you basically, ask yourself this question: if you had information available to you to prevent a house fire before it occurred because you knew there was a natural gas leak, to change a traffic pattern, to prevent a pedestrian death, to make security at a school better, to prevent violence, would you use it? Have you used it? Are you using it? You are. But why aren't we using it with respect to climate change when we have more data, more science than virtually any other field to demonstrate that it's real and it's happening? And yet we sit back and we say it's a fluke. It won't happen again. Even in the face of it happening, even in the face of 3 500-year storms happening within 3-year period, we will continue to say, I don't know, maybe something else caused it. Maybe we still have time. I think it's really important to start framing these issues because we have that information, we have that data, and the conversation is long overdue. We need to be making planning decisions, but there are also these really fundamentally important questions about fairness that can only happen in the context, in the legislative context to talk about. Why is it that we're willing to spend public tax dollars to bring back the business on the coastline or allow the person to circumvent the permitting process in that context, but people are moved to shelters because they can't afford that in West Warwick, or bankrupt and unemployed because they can't put a new business back in a lot that doesn't exist? How are we making these decisions about the public expenditure of tax dollars? These are really important questions, and they're questions that I think this legislation will allow us to start to talk about in a meaningful way. And I'm really thankful for the opportunity to come here and kind of share that story. I'm sharing this story not, I guess, partly as a CLF advocate, but also mostly as somebody who really cares about my hometown, my state, and was, deeply affected. So thank you very much.
I think that's great because I really often trying to help people, working to help people understand the sobering facts around this. And as Trish said, the facts here are really what we're talking about. And it is frustrating sometimes that folks seem to be failing to seek out the facts in these questions along the way. But what I'm hoping also, now that we've had that sobering reality check here, a local story, a local example of a negative climate impact that we're seeing along the way, that we can now start to look for solutions and strategies. And as Tricia was saying, the legislation, I'm going to talk quickly at the very end a bit about that, but I wanted to talk about some solutions and strategies, and that's what I think really the rest of the panel will sort of help to give some ideas and some vision and some direction on where we can go from here. But in the end, I'm hoping folks also start with Tricia's story and realize that the need is there, is fundamentally there, and for people's quality of life going forward, both at the small business and even big business level, right down to the kids that she's talking about that had to stay in that hotel room, it's right there for. So again, let me keep moving here because again we're tight on time, I know, along the way.